I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to Three Brothers Filmcast. I'm Anders, and I'm here with my brother,
Aren.
My last name is the same as my brother's.
And this month, we're talking about the American indie baseball film Eephus, now in limited release. We'll also talk about some of our favorite baseball films just in time for the beginning of MLB season. Before we dig in, a reminder to please leave a rating or review if you like what you're hearing. This is an independent podcast, so reviews and ratings are hugely important in getting the show to more listeners and growing our website, threebrothersfilm.com. Thank you for your support, and now on to the show.
And here we go.
More than any other team sport, baseball has the best movies. I don't think that's a controversial statement. There's something about both the structure of the game and its place in American history that lends itself to cinema. Eephus, the film by Carson Lund, gets this about the sport, as it tells the story of two adult rec league teams coming together for one last game on their local field before it's going to be torn down and repurposed. It's a film about community and place. It's about amateurs, as in those who do something for the love of it, rather than professionals. And it gets the particular rhythms of baseball as a pastime, something that fills the space and creates an environment in which to foster all kinds of relationships, from friendships to rivalries. An Eephus is a kind of pitch, a high, arcing curveball that fools the batter, or attempts to, by moving much slower than its initial pitch release would suggest, causing the batter to swing either earlier or later and getting the strike that way, rather than overwhelming with speed or placement. As the director Lund noted in a Q&A, the time-altering nature of the Eephus pitch echoes the way the game itself shapes time, the only major sport without a clock, where the routines of the game itself mark the boundaries of the beginning and end. No matter what the watch on your arm says, you gotta get 27 outs to end the game.
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
I thought Eephus was a lovely and thoughtful film. It's funny and whimsical. It revels in the oddities of baseball and the kind of characters it attracts. It fits neatly into a certain tradition of baseball movies that I'll get into later. But Aren, you're probably or definitely even a bigger baseball fan than I am. So what did you think of Eephus?
Yeah, I kind of loved Eephus. The thing that I appreciate most about the movie is that it understands the atmosphere of playing baseball more than even watching it.
Yeah.
It's there's something truly unique about baseball as a sport with this just kind of very unique rhythm that is completely unto itself, where people will be like, well, it's a very slow game. It's like, it's not actually a slow game. It moves so fast at moments that everything happens instantaneously, but it's the idea that the speed is unpredictable, and thus it creates its own rhythm. So it forces you into that, you have to enter that rhythm to be in sync with the game, to play it, to actually do well at it. And if the movie itself tries to capture that feeling, so it's not like a slow cinema movie, because it's only an hour and 40 minutes, but it's a slower movie and it's deliberate, and it lacks a lot of those kind of usual conventions in terms of narrative build and payoff, because it's very structured around the 9 innings of this game. You get a little bit before and a little bit after, and that's it.
Yeah.
But it lulls you in, and like a slow cinema movie or like a lot of art house cinema, even though, again, I don't know if I would classify this as art house ultimately, it's kind of on the border.
Yeah.
That it's a movie that really wants you to set to its rhythm, and once you set to its rhythm, it's really quite affecting, not only in terms of its very unique approach to storytelling, but I actually thought it was by the later moments quite touching, even though there's nothing really sentimental about it aside from this notion of things end and that's it.
Exactly. The movie and baseball, you said, forces you to match its speed, its rhythms, and these kind of things. But it also lets you baseball is a sport. I've played slow pitch and baseball just recreationally, not seriously. But baseball really does allow people to set the tone for what the game's going to be like in many ways. And it's also an interesting game where, and this is something that the movie captures, you can have people of quite varied ability on a team together, and it doesn't actually throw things off the way it does on a soccer pitch or on the ice for hockey, where like people who have vastly different skill sets, one person will completely dominate, right?
Unless I guess maybe if a pitcher was significantly better than everyone else, but that's
Absolutely.
because the pitcher kind of sets the pace of the game, right?
Right, which is hence when Major League Baseball, and as he sort of indicated in the Q&A after the movie, Nate Fisher, the co-writer and one of the stars of the film, said, he doesn't like the pitch clock, but that's why. That's the only way you can control it is with the pitch, right?
Yeah. There's just elements about this movie. So obviously baseball is the big thing and it's the bulk of what we're going to talk about here. But I just want to comment on the fact that the movie, so it's set in this small baseball diamond in Massachusetts. And as we learned in the Q&A afterwards, this is called Soldiers Field. And it's actually a place that in 1946, right after the war, the Yankees and the Red Sox kind of met in this neutral halfway point.
Between Boston
and so they actually had a bunch of these big players of the time playing there. And so you got like Joe DiMaggio and some of the other big stars of that era playing on this, classic wooden place with like the old press box that's up above the dugout. And you got the wooden board that's like, welcome to Soldiers Field. And it's got this very... it lets you know that baseball is a sport that's well over 100 years old, and it's an American sport, and it's kind of built into the land itself. And so the movie has this very distinct setting that's very limited, never allows you to leave the setting. You only get what happens in the ballpark.
Correct.
And because of that, it's almost like a weird liminal space of like America that is almost a time bubble, right? The movie's not very distinct in terms of its time setting. Like there's not really much
people aren't sitting on
technology
cell phones and things like that, right?
Yeah, and it's not being like, you don't get a reference to Trump or whatnot in the background, right?
It's
like
not interested in that.
There's no kind of time marker because time is the key here. But the other is that the movie takes place at the end of the summer. Like it takes place in
It's in October, right?
Yeah, but exactly. Like it's in October, so it's in that transition period with the leaves are changing color and the light fades really quick in the day. And so if you've ever played baseball, when the light goes, it's dangerous. Like
it is because you can get
lose
hit,
the ball in the twilight. I broke my nose that way. So literally losing in the outfield, losing a ball, and it smashed me in the nose because I couldn't see it against the twilight.
I think that's something I really liked about this movie is its use of setting. I think the other thing is setting and character. The plot is structured by the game, really, right?
It doesn't actually really
but it doesn't really have a plot. It's kind of shaped in that sense. It has a structure, but it's shapeless in other ways. But I really like the setting. You mentioned the specific descriptions of it, but there's also that timelessness of it. Even their uniforms, like the costumes and the mise en scène, all that stuff is a mix of eras and throwbacks and things like that. Because there's something about baseball, like this is the other thing about baseball, and as a sort of stand-in or, microcosm of America, is the reality is that baseball is not as popular as it once was, right? The movie is kind of aware of this. It's kind of like making reference to that in some ways, right? It's like, but it's not like nostalgic for like, some America that was some glory age that we have to recapture kind of thing. It's just that's life. Like some things they peak, they ebb, they flow, and then they do eventually end, right? And I think that the directors and writer in the Q&A, they were Lund and Fisher were not. They didn't quite say this, but the game itself is also like I think a little bit of a stand-in for the game of baseball itself, where it's in the twilight in some ways. And I don't want to push that too far because obviously MLB is by some metrics regained some of its popularity, and I think, but part of that is I think maybe the other thing. So you have this setting and time, which is really important to the movie in terms of how it's structured around each inning. Like Lund said in the Q&A that they were when they were preparing the movie, that they were very specific about how they knew every out of the game, right? They knew every inning, what was going to happen, what the score was, and all that stuff. It's not always super clear to the viewers, but that it's clear to me in watching the movie that the people who made it are, because they care about those things, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really interesting. But then, so once you have a setting, the other thing is the character, right? Lund and Fisher have talked both at the Q&A and in interviews. They've given about their love of like the weird characters of baseball, like the whole Eephus pitch and like people like Zach Greinke, the more recent stars. But even some of the other, this movie is full of sort of strange characters who are invited in to the game, right? And it doesn't mean that everybody's like buddy. It's not like, that's why I said both friendship and rivalry and different kinds of relationships that are formed, right? Some are like, I don't know, familial in ways, like sort of father-son type things, but others are like, people that you might not normally want to hang out with, but the game puts you into contact with them in ways. So I don't know. I think that's an interesting part of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's the collection of weirdos, right? Mm-hmm. That's the whole thing with baseball, is that it's the only sport where you can get a guy who's a big, chubby, slow dude. And he can be really good because the game it requires a different kind of physical ability.
Yeah.
It's not like a golf, where it's very slowed and like really one movement, but things like balance and timing are as important as strength and speed.
Yeah.
And so, everybody brings their own thing, and no, there's very few players, right, in the game, except for maybe like a Shohei Ohtani,
right,
in reality, who can do everything in the sport. Most people are, the idea of like a 5-tool player, right? It's the rarest of rare. And Ohtani's a 6-tool player because he pitches too, right?
Exactly.
But it's just a really interesting, it's a long way of saying that the imperfection of the players in baseball as a sport is always baked into it. It's assumption, you lose more than you win in terms of at bats. A guy who hits 300 means you hit it 3 out of every 10 times, but you're like one of the best in the league. So you take that out to the professional level and you put it into normal people who are willing to spend their Saturdays or their Sundays, as in this case in the film, playing at like an old ballpark with a crotchety umpire and all these guys who are, some of them might just be there to get tanked on beer. And you get a sense that some of them don't really like each other, but they've been doing it so long that they put up the person like they would somebody in their class at school, or maybe like a cousin that shows up at family things. So they're, as you said, a familial relationship to these characters. But there's also hints throughout the film, and you have to forgive us for not referencing the actors and the characters' names. It's actually it's very much a movie of that guys. Like, you recognize the faces, and the characters are all very distinct from each other, not just because of uniforms and numbers and stuff, but like they're very different type. You get basically there's a red team and a blue team, and you'll have the guy with the long hair and the beard, and the big fat guy and the really old guy, and you got the pitcher, and then you got the like dude with the blonde hair or the bald guy. Like, so it's super clear to tell the characters apart, but if I were to look at Wikipedia right now or IMDb, I would struggle to be like, without a photo, that's
exactly.
This character.
You need the photos. But they're characters. They're characters, and not in the sense of just characters on a script, but he's a character. When someone says so-and-so is quite the character, that's what this movie is, a collection of those people.
Yeah, like for instance, the main pitcher on the River Dogs, is that the team?
Troy.
Yeah, the blue team. And he's a pretty good pitcher, but he's got this kind of funny way of doing these almost like chicken bird arms to like warm up into the everybody's got a distinct windup, and they really play with it in this. And at first it's kind of weird, but as the game goes on, he's more tired, so the arms are lower, and he starts drinking more, so he starts losing his balance a bit, and he wants the game to end. He's like, I gotta go home. I should have been home an hour ago, and he just keeps drinking more. And then they're like, okay, we need a new pitcher in the game. It's like, okay, we're going to put relief you in. I need relief version of you because you got to keep pitching. Like, nobody else can keep pitching there. This game's just going to end right now. And there's this kind of desperation for that character because you never learn really where he's going to be going when he goes home, right? But you get a sense that the only place where he has a chance to be needed to such an extreme degree is on this field, because he's the one guy who's on that team is the most confident pitcher. And so, like, he might be a deadbeat. He might be a good, he might be a guy who's just a normal guy, or like he might be a great guy off the field and stuff. We don't really know. But there's the almost desperation through his physical exhaustion and his emotional exhaustion, the fact that he has to keep going, but he has to like ply himself with drink to almost physically get through it, creates this very kind of poignant relationship between like how much this game means to these people. Yeah. Despite how stakeless it is. Like, it's actually meaningless. And it happens almost at the beginning of the game. The catcher for the blue team is not there yet. They're up at the top of the inning. So the umpire's like, okay, but if we get around to his spot in the lineup, you guys automatically forfeit. And so there's this chance of the game, there's this setup that the game, already off the bat, the umpire's like, this game's kind of meaningless, right?
And it could end before it begins. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, but yet all the people and the teams are very committed to like, well, no, it's not meaningless. It's important because it's the last game at this field, but it's also the last game of the season for us. And it's ultimately the meaning of baseball is the fact that you lock into it.
Right.
And so, it's one of those things that when you're watching a baseball game and some people who might only like football or they only like basketball or hockey because they're faster paced, or maybe they just don't like sports at all, they'll be like, wow, baseball is so unbelievably slow. And I'm like, well, it would actually be much more interesting if you just started watching what the pitcher's doing. And they're like, well, I'm not interested in the pitcher. I just want to see people hit the thing. And it's like, the pitcher is the thing. It's like, it's the hypnotic. If you watch the pitcher and start adjusting to their pace, you're going to get really into it because you're going to start understanding that it's a mind game between him trying to predict what the batter is expecting and predicting of him. So it's just kind of back and forth. That's why I always use the term chess match. It's like, if you've ever watched a really, really intense guy, two guys, really smart guys play chess against each other, it's actually really interesting because you just end up staring at the person and trying to read their mind.
Yeah.
And that is almost the essence of like watching a movie, right? You're trying to read their mind. And so it's just this very intense kind of feeling for how laid back it is.
I think that's something the movie does well. Is it, you mentioned there's moments, again, it's not an art film, but it has some of that pacing and sort of the way that I think this movie, there's some people, if you don't let yourself get into it, I'm really glad I saw it in theaters. I think it would be not a movie that, like, I wouldn't recommend sitting on the couch and like doing other things because baseball,
But baseball itself,
weird.
it would be easily distracted from it.
Exactly. But baseball's kind of great that way, where like you can have it on in the background, like which I often do during the summer, even if I'm not like specifically watching it, and yet you can also get into the game and you can focus on it and allow yourself to be drawn in. And I think that's what, as you say, what a movie can do too. Right? It rewards attention in a society where I think we want our attention to be drawn rather than us giving our attention to something in some ways.
Yeah, and it's funny how baseball is a sport that personifies America, right? It's the American pastime. As you get some wonderful speeches in Field of Dreams and stuff, it's and Bull Durham too in a different way.
Yeah, but I always think of the great James Earl Jones speech. Yeah.
The one constant through all the years, Ray, has been baseball. America has rolled by like an army of steamrollers. It's been erased like a blackboard, rebuilt and erased again. But baseball has marked the time. This field, this game, it's a part of our past, Ray. It reminds us of all that once was good. And it could be again. Oh, people will come, Ray. People will most definitely come.
Or Bull Durham is like the only church worth going to, or like my religion is baseball. It's I've prayed to Buddha, Allah, blah blah blah, and it's like the only one that ultimately fills my soul is baseball. This Susan Sarandon, the great monologue at the beginning of the movie. So despite that fact that baseball represents America extremely, in this moment in time, it's somewhat countercultural, which is weird, right?
Definitely.
And so baseball actually aligns well with an indie movie of this type because it requires a trust and, not a suspension of disbelief so much, but something that's similar to it, which is a willingness to engage and meet something on its own terms. And because of that, it's this nice wedding of subject matter and form and content, right? Like into this, it's just something that feeds both elements of it. Like it seems very true to baseball, but very true to cinema of this type. And yet something that you watch it and it's so deceptively simple in some aspects.
Yeah. That is one of the things about this movie that when I was watching it, I was like, in some ways I was like, okay, like it's pretty straightforward. Like, and yet it's also intricate. Like I don't want to undersell the skill with which they put it together, and yet it's unassuming. It's not flashy. It's not an indie film that's trying to like blow our mind with like the blocking and framing and things like that. And yet there are some images that are pretty, but there are also images of great like sort of pedestrianism in it, and that's fine. I think it works for the movie.
Yeah, and it because it's an American indie made for a very low budget. Like I would say noticeably low, but not in a bad way. Mm-hmm. But like in the early going, you get like a audio cameo of Frederick Wiseman on the radio, and you get some like other audio clips cut in that kind of supposed to give it a provincial community feel of the like people who still listen to AM radio, right? And you get the city ads on there and stuff. That kind of stuff is rough. In like rough, not in a bad way, but rough in a descriptive, in that like it doesn't have the audio polish that you would get in a higher budget movie that just like, you know, certain levels of movies sound and look certain ways. And especially when this movie, because it takes place over the course of the day and it's filmed very deliberately in terms of its lighting. So like the sun is right above them when it starts, and like
So it's quite bright.
So there's a huge amount of top light in the cinematography,
which is not what directors would usually do.
You don't want to film at the time of day because it generally washes things out on screen, and everybody gets too hot, right? Like the whites, the brightness levels, the whites really get the highlights, and that cameras don't. There's a reason why you use zebra stripe on a camera sometimes, right? So you can get a sense of what's the hot spots, and you can dial down the aperture to deal with it.
And a lot of amateur films end up shooting too much in the bright light, and it looks bad, right?
It's because they can't afford lighting, right? Or daytime's the easiest to film in because that's when people are available. Night shoots are much more complicated and stuff. So it has those elements, and yet that can, especially because that kind of stuff is mostly in the beginning of the movie, it can distract you from how intricate it is on a formal level, because this movie achieves an almost, dare I say, like magical ambience later in the film. The movie it reminded me most of is a John Carpenter. It reminded me of The Fog, which sounds really weird.
But I think it's the radio stuff too.
Well, it's the radio stuff, but it's the setting within that season, or like it's the setting of in this kind of transitory shoulder season in small town. But it's specifically this movie. I think it's when the lights of the car. So at one point it starts, but the game's still going, and the guys all drive their cars out and point it and just leave the lights on, and it shoots across, and it creates this very soft like a mixture of really hard spots and then the soft wash coming in, and it almost plays like a fog or a mist across the field, and it just creates this really almost pea soup atmosphere of like, and fitting that it's New England too, right? Because then you really, really gets in there this rich American twilight, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a great description. I never thought of that, but I think that's actually very descriptive of it. And there's something about those Carpenter films and what they did here that's really appealing to me. The more the older I get,
it scratches the itch.
Right. The other thing I would say about this film that I want to spend a couple of minutes, like you said, so we get these characters, you get all, but it's not just the oddball players. You get a few other people who are drawn into the game, right? So passersby. Specifically, we get Franny, the
scorekeep,
the guy who's the scorekeep, right? And at the beginning of the film, there's a very strange thing where he's sitting outside the ballpark, looking through the chain link fence as he does his scorekeeping, right? But at some point in the movie, he takes over as the umpire, right?
Yeah.
And moves up to the press box, the old press box. And they inviting him in, and he seems almost reticent to do it.
Yeah,
right?
it's like it's invading the sanctity of it.
Exactly. It's like they've asked him to be their priest in a sense, like, or something like that. And I love that stuff. I think that's really good. I think even the bits with the one guy's family coming.
Oh, and she sings the anthem, and he's like, "Come on, just let her wait one more at bat before they go home."
And then that great kid that guy's that they apparently just discovered in the town.
Yeah, there's just this fat kid wandering through, kind of looking all like. Yeah. Very confused and funny.
But then you get like the pizza guy and stuff like that, right? Like these just little bits. They're not
or
like
the girlfriend, right?
Yeah. So I think these are important. It is the way that people who come there, some because they they have a connection or relationship to the players, others because of the game or the location, and then they find themselves potentially drawn into the game as well. So I think they kind of stand as a sort of stand-in for the audience in some ways, in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
Like, I actually really love scoring baseball. I don't know if you've ever...
I know how to do it because of
like I've scored my kids' baseball games. Of course, Franny has like the really nice Wilson baseball scorebook that's like, all detailed and all that. But yeah, there's something about scoring a baseball game and learning how to do it. What's amazing about that, and I think is interesting, it's like a script. because you can actually recreate an entire baseball game from its scorecard in a way that you cannot with any other sport.
Yeah, because each at-bat is an event.
A discrete event.
Yeah, which is why each game tells a story, which is what the story of this movie is.
Right. And again, which is why I'm, as I said in my intro, that baseball really lends itself well to cinema for that reason, I think.
Yeah, because it's the time. It's that the inherent engagement with it is an engagement with time, and thus becomes a reflection on life in and of itself. Like the act of doing is an act of reflection.
Yeah. So I think this movie, if it sounds like we're saying the film is a little bit existential, it is.
Yes.
It really is. Because and I don't want to like oversell it, because it's not like heavy-handed.
It's subtle.
But it's there. And I think the director, even in his elaborating on this term Eephus, like a couple of people have mentioned the movie, I watched, what are you doing podcast? Or what movie did you go see the other night? And it was like Eephus. And they're like, what? I'm like, well, it's a baseball movie. They're like, Eephus? I'm like, yeah, it's a kind of pitch, right? Like for people who aren't really familiar with a lot of baseball stuff.
What's this he says in the movie?
But he says
it's a Hebrew term that means nothing?
It's a Hebrew term for nothing, for zero, nothingness. And it's almost like, so it becomes this kind of like, both drawing on like the sort of some of the Jewish baseball players of the past, but also a kind of like philosophical sort of Zen aspect to it.
No, it's the negation of there'd be nothing is what makes it effective, which is why baseball itself is this absence of time. Thus, the time is heightened because it stands still in this 9 innings.
And as soon as that last out is done,
it's
spell's over.
Yeah, but I loved the Eephus monologue. And it's Nate Fisher, the co-writer. Is the player who he's talking about. He wants to get in the game. He's the relief pitcher for the red team, and he wants to get in the game because he can throw an Eephus, and he just wants to try and throw an Eephus because nobody throws it anymore. And then the other guy who's kind of the other bench warmer, who gets a at-bat later in the game, and it's kind of a pivotal one, but he is asking all these kind of perky questions. Oh, what's the Eephus? And he kind of walks him through it, and it cuts to this really jittery frame rate sequence of watching the ball soar through the air, and it's parabolic arc. Yeah, it's a really high one, and it's a very strange moment because it's the only time in the movie in which the visual presentation is actually stretching time in like the formal presentation. Like this, in all the other moments, like the obviously the movie's not set in real time, but the way it's shot, the shots are not actually like warping your subjective experience of it. But in that moment, it is, and it's this weird, almost like hypnotic thing of the balls hypnotizing you, but it's also again underscoring this overall meaning of
that's what the pitch does.
What is the pitch supposed to do to the batter? Right, it's supposed to like hypnotize them, and you freeze in the moment, and that's why. I don't know, this movie, like, it's kind of perfect in what it is trying to do. Like, I'm not saying it's a perfect movie because there's no such thing, but even, like, I think this it's one of those times where you watch it and you're like, wow, that's just like a really great wedding of form and subject. And these things, what it's attempting to accomplish works so well in the manner in which it's, presented. It's just like, it's very thoughtful. It's a very thoughtful movie.
The other thing, you mentioned that the film itself isn't really strictly following real time. I think you're right. Like, it's not quite clear. Like, if they started it just after lunch, then it doesn't really make a lot of sense that they'd, given the score of the game and how quickly they've been playing, that they'd actually still be there at like 8 or 9 at night.
Yeah, why does it take like 9 hours?
And so it's almost like they're in like some sort of hole in time and space, right? Like the Eephus again, the nothingness, this like limbo zone, which gives it kind of a supernatural. Like I don't think that's like I'm not saying that like you can read it as like that, but I'm just saying like
no character's a ghost. No, though you could say Spaceman Lee.
Like that. Maybe that, right? Like there's moments where the film verges on like not quite surrealism, but like almost like pushing things into the whimsical a little bit, just a little bit. But not enough that it ever breaks the spell of reality.
In a literary sense.
Yeah.
right? Like in a way that a character in a book, because it's a story in and of itself, it can function in a way where a character has no real like logical purpose to exist, or the idea of them inhabiting anything outside of that individual scene is actually not meaningful. So they exist as a ghost to like the tale in front of you. And this movie has a little bit of that. And
that's something I really admire about it. It's a risky thing to do that. I think too many times when movies try to do it, either people who watch them then become like obsessed with like calling it like magical realist or like, and this is not what this is doing.
No.
But it's the literariness of it that cinema can enter into, but it's a challenge, I think, and I think the subject matter and the way the film is presented allows that. Yeah,
and so I think it's pretty obvious we're both big fans of this movie. It might be the best movie I've seen this year so far, and I just know because I love baseball so much, and I like movies that are about the ends of things. Like there's a reason, ever since we did American Graffiti on the podcast a couple summers ago, that movie has just grown so much in my mind because it captures the end of like adolescence so well. And so movies about ends of things, there's something poignant and reflective there that really speaks to me at this moment. I don't know what this says about the wider world.
Yeah.
But this movie has that too, so I can see myself thinking about it a lot as the year goes on. But like just saying all that, I don't want it to come across like this movie is self-serious.
No,
or
not
that
at all.
it's like
it's very funny,
dramatic.
Actually.
It's quite loose and goofy in the way that a baseball game is. And so a lot of the characters are crude and kind of funny or kind of sad, and that makes them funny. Like I'm thinking of the there's clearly like the captain of the blue team, and he's trying so hard to like impress the guys on the team, but clearly none of them really like him because again, you get a sense that he might be a guy who's like super successful outside of the park. Like he might be really wealthy or something, and the other guys are kind of working guys, and so there's this almost resentment.
Or they're quite a bit younger.
Yeah. Or there just is a kind of power dynamic or something playing there that it textures the way that these characters interact with him. But there's a very, almost desperation to that character again, who it makes me like... It's sad, but it's funny because he's kind of pathetic. He's kind of a loser. And just I don't know, all these characters are very intriguing, and even just their faces, right? Like, so you get Keith William Richards, who's the pitcher on the red team. And he's probably the most recognizable guy because he's in Uncut Gems. He's the guy who ends up shooting Adam Sandler. With the crazy
just
eyes.
staring at him through the glass at the end. Like,
some great
so
shots.
Pissed off, yeah.
But he's a total that guy. Like you just look at his face and you're like, I kind of just want to watch this guy because he looks like he's got character to him. That like so many times I watched I saw the movie The Monkey the other day and I really didn't like it. And I made a comment to my friend afterwards because Theo James stars in the movie, but Theo James plays like kind of loserish characters. He plays twins. And I was like, why can't we just have losers in movies anymore? Like in the sense, an actor who just looks like oh, this is a schlub, but let's get a super, super handsome guy and we'll just make him act like a dope. It's like, why don't you just get a guy who's not super handsome?
Exactly.
And it's going to become like, he could be a great actor too, or super funny or whatnot. So like, this movie has guys who look like that.
That's a challenge. So if a movie is going to do what you just described, or it's actually a challenge, right?
Yeah.
You have to have the actor has to be game, and the script has to be game to understand that the character is good looking, and then like reveal their sort of patheticness and stuff in certain ways, right? I haven't finished or caught up completely on the new season of White Lotus, but there's something that's doing with Patrick Schwarzenegger's character, right?
Yeah.
Where this guy who's like, super jacked, he's literally a Schwarzenegger Kennedy in real life, right? Like, and they're stripping away and he thinks he knows everything in the world, and eventually you're finding out he's like just pathetic, right? But movies don't want to do that usually. So like that whole thing, it comes across like, I haven't seen The Monkey, but I imagine just knowing Theo James that it probably comes across like they just cast him because he was popular, and it's like he's trying to fit in the role. This movie, I just imagine, I actually have to give whoever the casting director was in this a huge amount of props, because they weren't, other than like one character, the cameo by Bill Spaceman Lee, in this movie, And for people who don't know, famous legendary pitcher for the Red Sox and the Expos. But most of the people in this movie, I'm positive, were cast because either they were friends of the directors or they are just regular people from the community that they
Yeah, they
cast
live in the
some
area. They
Yeah.
could get to it.
And so they could be cast for their particular characters, their qualities, their faces, and things like that, which you don't really get a lot in movies these days.
But see, that's the thing. People mistake.
It's an anti-Instagram face movie.
Oh, absolutely. Though, like, there's some handsome guys in this too.
No, exactly. I'm not
I know.
denigrating people.
No, I know. I'm just
Frankly, I find
clarifying for
Instagram
people.
face disgusting.
Well, it's unnatural. But
Yeah.
the casting for the individuals in this movie, it's like, yeah, they just seem real and interesting. That's like that's the thing that people, I think a lot of Hollywood folks might mistake, and always this idea that only beauty is interesting. It's like, no. I just want to watch something on screen that is like captivating, and you can captivate me with just like a really interesting face.
And again, that's the trust of the director to allow that, to allow a movie to just sort of exist in certain ways. Again, it all sort of thematically comes back to this thing.
And I also really appreciated the performance. Sorry, what's the guy's name? The scorekeeper. Like his
Franny?
Yeah, his performance is really good.
It is, yeah.
And it gets so later in the game when he's umping and he starts calling balls all the time, and guys are like chirping him because they don't see, he seems to be, his zone is very all over the place. And he kind of calls out in this very like choked voice almost of, I'm trying my best.
Yep.
And he's so serious about it.
Because he's never been invited into the game in that way.
No, but even when he was on the outside, he took it so seriously.
Oh, yeah.
And it's this sacred object
The way
to
he
him,
sets
right?
up his little table.
But also,
and like,
remember, the movie starts with a shot of him coming out of the woods, and it ends with him going back in the woods.
do you think that that's also a little bit of a reference to Field of Dreams?
It is. Of course it is, right?
Yeah, it's got to be.
Lots of stuff about this, like even the fact when Spaceman Lee shows up, he
It's
just
almost
kind of
like Joe DiMaggio, like-
pops up. And it's like, oh, you're going to get this guy who throwing an Eephus is actually one of the things that helped him lose the World Series 1 year. But like, there's a knowingness and a kind of magic to it. But maybe that's the thing, is baseball's romantic at the end of the day. It's also a game that romance is built into the very engagement of it, because you have to be delusional enough to believe that you can hit the ball when if the odds are much against you that you will not, right?
Yep.
You have to have that belief, and only if you have that belief is the magic of hitting the ball actually possible.
Yeah. That's why the question of belief becomes a big important thing in baseball. In a lot of baseball movies.
Absolutely.
It's all combat. Life. This game. Combat.
Nice to be back on this grass field. It's a shame those pricks are building a school here.
Can't quit this field, huh? Doesn't want to stop playing.
Well, what are we doing here? Come on! Get going now. The whole game would be pointless. It was already pointless, fellas. Hey, Meade, throw the Eephus.
The Eephus pitch is a type of curveball so unnaturally slow that it confuses the batter.
Makes him lose track of time.
It's kind of like baseball. I'm looking around for something to happen. Poof, game's over.
So I mentioned earlier also that my contention that baseball has the best movies of any sport.
Well,
Is that
team
fair to
sport.
say?
I think boxing
Yes,
is
because
the other.
as I say, boxing probably
Something
has
so
more
cinematic.
prestigious entries, right? Like, I mean, Raging Bull and
So many good
stuff,
ones.
yeah.
Raging Bull and Rocky and
Exactly. But they were individual stories, right? Baseball is a team sport, and it lends itself to different kind of films, and it's also very American in a way that like boxing is more international. And,
True.
And all that, right? So that raises the question, and this movie, and Eephus is so clearly in many ways aware of the history of baseball movies, without being like overly referential or anything. But what do you think are the best baseball movies? I mean, it's a big question, right? Like, what are our favorites? There's a lot to choose from, but I think why don't we each of us we name a few movies and see if we can comment on just briefly on a few of the best baseball movies. I think Maybe we have to start with the one that we both have already mentioned a couple times, and it's Field of Dreams. Here's a question: is Field of Dreams the best baseball movie?
So maybe we have the two different opinions. I think the two Kevin Costner movies are the two best baseball movies.
Oh yes, exactly. I agree.
And one's the minor league one, and one's the major league one. One's the magical one. One's the mundane one. Sacred and the profane of baseball, right? So I just rewatched Bull Durham. I think Bull Durham is the best.
Okay.
Partially,
I think that's a completely legitimate. It's those, but I do wonder if those are the only two the best.
No, I think those are the only correct answers. I think they're two of the best movies of the 80s. Like I rewatched Field of Dreams a few years ago, and that movie is genuinely one of the most moving movies you'll ever watch. And it's kind of insane that it gets away with what it does in terms of storytelling.
Also, it has your boy Burt Lancaster.
I know, Burt. No, but that's the part of what's so moving when he leaves the field. No, man. But Bull Durham, I don't know. It's just, I think the thing that I love with baseball is that it's hyper serious. It's romantic. Yeah. It freezes time, but it's stupid. It's a thing where a guy called like Dump Truck. Like, this is Howie Dump Truck Jones of Pawtucket. Like, and he would be like a 270-pound guy, but he hits 40 bombs, right? Yeah. And he might literally run slower than your grandma, but that kind of character, or it's a game where guys literally like spit and chew gum and like throw at each other and get into fights all the time.
Yeah, one thing people love, baseball is more bench clearing balls than any sport.
Yeah, and they straight up brawl. And it's like, how is this in a sport? It's just guys are so locked in on this idea of using a stick to hit a ball that they're willing to like just go at it. And Bull Durham understands how awesomely stupid baseball is, and how that is as essential to it as the romance.
The magic. Yeah. So I think maybe they're like the yin and yang, or like the paired. You kind of have to have one. You have to have both.
It's both Costner, so it's so perfect as the duel.
Yep. And I think I would imagine that Bull Durham is probably the favorite for people who've played ball.
It is. I believe it is. Level. Yeah.
Because I think it also captures the sort of the realities of being like a minor league pro,
Yeah, most guys are not top prospects, so they get into baseball. You make it to the show by hustling and working, and these are minor league teams, so they don't pay much at all. These are guys who work as Uber drivers when they're not playing and stuff, and like they're all live as roommates in like kind of flat houses and stuff. Like these guys don't live romantic lives at all.
Right. Baseball also, I mean, the league has done some things to damage this, but compared with a lot of other sports, I think there's probably more people sort of eking out a career. I won't say a living, but a career playing baseball at various levels than, whereas like a lot of other sports, basketball and even hockey and definitely globally soccer, there's definitely this sort of like professional, like hyper fixation on the highest levels of the sport.
Yeah, because baseball,
like people go,
it's more community.
People are really into minor league baseball in a way that there's very few people who, outside of certain communities, like, so I live in Kitchener, Waterloo, Ontario, and Kitchener is a city of hockey, where there are people who are really into the Kitchener Rangers junior minor team in a way that I think is more similar to how many Americans are into minor league ball.
Yeah.
But that's not very common.
No.
Like, to have people who, like, that's their primary engagement with the sport is through that rather than the pros.
Yeah, that's the team they follow.
Yeah.
But it's also the fact that, like, those players can become the pros. You might be only seeing them at upstage in their career, right?
Yeah, and there's something about knowing and being like, oh, I saw that guy before he ever went to the show and became what he became later. And you can occasionally get in baseball also these people who do have this late career moment where they, maybe it's increasingly less common, but
it's much less common. But
it was a thing at one time.
Yeah. Yeah, like Bull Durham it's the working man's baseball movie, and because of that it's more crude and it's more it's a rom-com as well.
Yeah, so there's a sensuality rather than a romanticism to it.
Yeah. Like Kevin Costner and Susan Sarandon are very, very good together, and they just have such good chemistry.
Exactly.
And she's such a likable character, and she really, like, she's the central character, right?
Yes.
So she's the baseball fan who this is her religion. She literally says that to start it.
I believe in the Church of Baseball. I've tried all the major religions and most of the minor ones. I've worshipped Buddha, Allah, Brahma, Vishnu, Siva, trees, mushrooms, and Isadora Duncan. I know things. For instance, there are 108 beads in a Catholic rosary, and there are 108 stitches in a baseball. When I learned that, I gave Jesus a chance.
So yeah, you've made a good case for Bull Durham. Field of Dreams, I don't know. I could go on and on about it, but it's literary in a weird way, based on the book, and has this sort of magic to it, literal magic, and almost a kind of ghost story and things, you know. And it's about fathers and sons, and it's about, you know, all those dreams. It's literally about dreams, right? And so I think that's why I think Field of Dreams will more likely appeal to people who aren't necessarily hardcore baseball fans.
Yeah. I think because the kind of magical appeal of Field of Dreams is something that like you could genuinely not like baseball, and you'd probably be like drawn to the interesting curiosity of this idea of like this guy gets this vision to do something. And
but it's also Field of Dreams is a movie that is tied to, I said earlier that the other thing that baseball movies get. So I said two things about that. Baseball movies, they can get the idea of the rhythms of it, the structure of the game. And I think Bull Durham can do that, and the way people structure their lives around this kind of stuff. But then there's also the place of baseball in America and history, and that's what Field of Dreams gets at, right? Field of Dreams is a film about the 20th century. You have the connection back to the Black Sox and the scandal. Costner's and his wife are boomers, right?
Yeah.
Former hippies. That's people who have moved on from that, who lived through that countercultural movement, but have now moved on and they have a family and stuff, and are, you know, but are still dedicated to a certain notion of American liberalism.
Yeah.
Right. And then you have the key thing of making, in the book, it's J.D. Salinger is the reclusive writer that he seeks out, that Kinsella seeks out, making it this fictional African-American writer, Terrence Mann, played by James Earl Jones, I think is a really important thing. And then the notion of, you know, all that. So it's really tied to the notion of American history and this arc of American history in the 20th century.
Yeah.
So again, that's, I think, why Field of Dreams might appeal to people beyond baseball in a lot of ways.
Yeah. It's one of those, like, if you were just talking about great movies about America.
Yeah.
Field of Dreams would be one of them.
It's evocative. Okay. So Kevin Costner's the king of baseball movies. So maybe those would be each of our number one. What's the next movie that you would mention is people want to seek out the best baseball movies to get themselves in the mood for this summer and this upcoming season here?
I mean, in the interest of being interesting, I really love Everybody Wants Some.
I'm glad you mentioned it. I have it on my long list of movies.
Richard Linklater's 2016 movie about college baseball players, and it's literally like it's his Dazed and Confused set in the 80s. Of hanging out over the course of one day, and it's the new pitchers coming in, and he's going to join the team, and he's the freshman, and it's like, oh, he's got the hot arm, and getting with the guys and at the frat house, because you know the team lives together as a frat essentially, and within this college. It's a movie that understands that baseball, because it's a pastime, the movie's about the passage of time. It's about the end of a certain type of adolescence and the entry into a new part of it. It's a reflection on what it means to be a man, about what type of man you're going to be in relation to women, the way that involves with some of the female characters, and specifically one, and this kind of flirtation that happens throughout the day. But I also just think it's like a great hangout movie. It's super funny. It's one of the early movies with Glenn Powell, kind of showing off how cool he was.
It was one of my top 10 films of 2016.
I loved it. I remember I was like kind of shocked by how much I liked it. I went on a bit of a whim, and then I was like, no, I think this is like a great movie. And it was funny because it came out, you know, it's his follow-up to Boyhood.
Yeah.
And I think it's much superior to Boyhood.
Well, I prefer it as well.
Yeah.
But
so
we might get some listeners to will be outraged that I don't love Boyhood the way other people do.
Well, just
I don't want to get on.
It's just, you know,
I still like
the
it,
Harry
but-
Potter series is actually a more compelling observation of the passage of time on an actor than Boyhood is.
I've written a long piece about that many years ago.
What's yours?
That's it. Okay, if you go a couple directions here, okay, I'm gonna go really left field with this, and I say that one of my favorite baseball entertainments of all time is the Simpsons episode Homer at the bat.
Yeah, no,
I love it. It might be it's a top 5 Simpsons episode for me. I love it so much. I hum the softball song I know it's softball, but it doesn't matter. It's, you know,
Talking softball
from here to San Diego.
Talking
It's so good. And
softball, Manly and Canseco.
Ken Griffey and his grotesquely swollen jaw. I mean, we can sing the whole song, but it's so good. It has so many great lines in it. The casting of the real MLB players.
Oh, yeah, I know Don Mattingly and stuff. I told you to get rid of those sideburns.
I don't know what you think sideburns are, Mr. Burns.
Yeah, I still like it more than Steinbrenner.
Yeah. No, like, it's very quotable, but it also makes reference to so many other great baseball movies, you know, with Wonder Bat and Homer the Natural as a play on The Natural, film which you know, is fine. I haven't watched it in years, but I love that episode. I think it also again revolves around this idea of this you know, work-based softball team, and it becomes so important that Mr. Burns hires these Major League Baseball players to come and work at the power plant so they can be ringers in his team, right? And that line at the whenever I complain about, you know, baseball managers and like trying to like control the odds and things like that, I always think of, you know, at the end of the episode when it's this most important game that they have to win, and which is of course nothing, right? It's just against like the another town's team. And Mr. Burns is like, he's, you know, Darryl Strawberry is up to bat,
Yeah.
who plays Homer's position, and Mr. Burns is like, Strawberry, take the bench, you know, Homer, you're up. You know, he's getting put in for Darryl Strawberry, and Smithers is like, what are you doing, Mr. Burns? Like, you know, and he's like, you know, the pitcher's a righty, he's a lefty. I'm playing the odds. It's what smart managers do to win ball games. And I always imagine that, you know, these guys are quoting Mr. Burns when they try to be smarter than.
You mean when they pull Jose Barrios and put Yusei Kikuchi in the fourth inning in Minnesota, exactly. When you're don't even runs. Remind me.
But yeah, the idea, like, there's so many little things like that where it like gets the madness of baseball, and that would drive people crazy that way, and it's just genuinely hilarious.
All right, Monty, it's up to your managerial skills. What to do? Smithers, massage my brain.
Yes, sir.
You, Strawberry, hit a home run.
Okay, Skip.
I told him to do that.
Brilliant strategy, sir.
Honestly, I think if you pulled current baseball players today in major leagues, I think if you said, what's your favorite movie, they would say Bull Durham. But if you said, what's your favorite like baseball show, they would say the Simpsons episode over anything else.
Yeah.
Like they love it.
A lot of people love it, yeah.
They mention it a lot. That's a bit of a cheat, though.
Okay, fine.
No, it's fine. It's just a list about great baseball show. Like, we're not going to talk about TV shows, so it's fine. But like, it's a one-off episode, and it's loomed so large over kind of baseballs on screen.
Absolutely. There's then when I think of baseball movies, there's kind of two other ways you can go with baseball movies, right?
Yeah.
Movie proper. You can either have movies that are the kind of like maybe follow the Field of Dreams model, or kind of like nostalgia pieces. So you have something like The Sandlot.
Yeah.
Right? Again, with James Earl Jones.
I know.
You know, I like The Sandlot. I don't actually love it.
Yeah, I'm fond of it. But
I'm fond of it, but you know, but then the other way you can go is then historical baseball movies, right? So you might have something like 8 Men Out, or 42 is pretty good. But actually, I just want to draw attention to a movie that I don't even think you haven't seen either, which is Billy Crystal's HBO movie 61.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
Which is actually really good. It's about the Roger Maris pursuit of Mantle and Maris both going for breaking Babe Ruth's record, right, in the 60s, and how Mantle was the hotshot superstar, played by Thomas Jane in it, and how he was the one who was meant to do that, right? The movie's really concerned with pairing him against Maris, who's not as appealing to the fans. He's kind of a quieter guy. He's a family guy as opposed to Mantle, the womanizer, right? All these things, and he's played by Barry Pepper, kind of just post Saving Private Ryan, and it's really nice in that way, the movie, and it's also bookended, framed. Because the movie came out, I want to say it was like 99 or...
I think it's around then, yeah.
Yeah. So it was just after the season when Sosa and Maguire at the time were breaking Maris's record. And the movie is actually bookended with Maris's family going to the stadium and being aware that Rogers' record was also about to be broken. And the film is 61 asterisks is also in the title. Because one of the things the film draws attention to is that, yes, both, Mantle and Maris got up there, broke Ruth's, the breaking of Ruth's record did not happen in the same number of games. And so baseball purists often want to have these asterisks on records that don't stand up the test of time in their mind because, they didn't play as many games or that, Now, I think from a modern perspective, you're going to have the opposite thing where there's certain records in baseball that won't be broken because pitchers don't pitch the same number of innings. The way the game is played is different. They won't allow people to do certain things, right? So, for all those reasons, I think it's actually kind of interesting and evocative movie, and it's clear Billy Crystal, as a director, really loves the sport.
Yeah. I've always actually been curious about the movie, partially just because of the VHS you had.
Yeah.
And the post, I don't know, there's something so simple when you're like a kid, but you just see it's like, oh, what's this number mean? Like,
but yeah, good cast, and I think it's a way of approaching one of these historical stories of baseball, right?
Yeah. I'm not going to belabor this, my last pick long, but I'll stay in the comedy lane, and I'll say Major League, which I think is very funny.
It's a funny movie.
With like Tom Berenger, Charlie Sheen, bunch of other guys in there, but it is an underdog baseball movie. It gives a lot of the cliche things that are like very fun to watch and witness, and like it's fun to see the bad guys get their comeuppance. The joke is that a lot of people, it seems like the Adelson family is doing this to the Dallas Mavericks right now, but like deliberately making a team bad so you can sell it off. And in this case, it's like they're gonna make the team deliberately bad so she can then get out this big business deal, and she doesn't care about, so she's going to put the worst fit on the worst culture team, and the worst hitters on the team and all this stuff, and the wild pitcher.
It's a formula that has been copied many times, including even like Ted Lasso, right?
No, exactly, and it's effective formula. So it's a movie that actually becomes an effective underdog sports movie where you're like actually invested in Cleveland beating the other teams and doing well, and the characters to fix their things. But it's also like a really insane 80s comedy of just classic kind of frat stuff and hijinks, and it's kind of raunchy, and it's,
Charlie Sheen's wild thing,
it's
the glasses.
It's really enjoyable, honestly. I've seen it a few times, and it's just like a good late night 80s movie.
On Blu-ray.
Yeah, it's a good late night 80s movie.
For sure. Maybe there's one other film I will mention, partly because I watched it with the boys about a year or so ago, and I've heard it mentioned by a lot of people, female baseball fans.
Oh.
And it is League of Their Own, which is actually a very good movie and a great cast. And I think that one thing I find interesting just in life is like baseball is a sport where there are some very, very passionate, women who are fans of the sport. I mean, I think Bull Durham addresses that.
Oh yeah,
everybody wants them, all that, right? But this is that the historical situation where during the war, when women became pros in that way and drew audiences for the first time and stuff. So I think it's worth mentioning because I think there's a lot of women who find that film sort of spurred their love of baseball in some ways.
Yeah,
and it makes a nice sort of historical pairing with some of the other ones. So.
Are you crying?
No.
Are you crying? Are you crying? There's no crying. There's no crying in baseball.
Why don't you leave her alone, Jimmy?
Oh, you zip it, Doris. Rogers Hornsby was my manager, and he called me a talking pile of pig shit. And that was when my parents drove all the way down from Michigan to see me play the game. And did I cry? No! And you know why?
No.
Because there's no crying in baseball. There's no crying in baseball! No crying!
Yeah, you go on and on. You just start leaving. We didn't even mention Moneyball.
Well, it's because it's the movie about the triumph of soulless analytics.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of movies, as I say, a lot of baseball movies we can choose from, but also sometimes the sport itself offers a lot of drama for us too, and as much as sometimes I'm frustrated with the teams that I follow, and especially the Blue Jays at times, the start of the season right now is always exciting because hope springs eternal, right? 162 games in front of us, anything can happen. So
yeah, everyone's batting 1,000.
Yep. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on Three Brothers Film.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.